address COVID-19 impact on demand, commodity, and electricity prices. His primary focus on preparation of market studies to support and inform financing, refinancing, IPOs, and M&A of power, fuel, and water destination projects in Europe, Middle East, North Africa, Asia, and Americans covering both conventional and renewable generation technologies on behalf of major international project developers, financiers, and fuel suppliers. Over the 15 years, Kim has supported the successful completion of 47 gigawatts and 471 MIGD of capacity with a transition revenue of more than USD 32 billion. Welcome, Kim Keats. Are you ready to speak of your presentation? Hello, Kim.
Hi, Jessica. Thanks very much. Share the screen, right?
Yes. Yeah, you can speak. You can share your screen now.
All panelists. Advanced sharing options. I've got advanced sharing options. Let me see if we can get this right. So yes. And then I go like this. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see your screen now. Thank you. Fantastic.
Right. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much, Jessica, for the kind introduction. I am going to give a quick view on what has happened with respect to COVID on demand, commodity prices, and electricity. I'm going to be using Spain as a specific example. Some of you will have heard me say similar things before, and you'll be glad to know that in the last 6 to 12 months, I haven't changed my mind. If we still focus on the fundamentals, we'll still be able to sort of assess or identify what's going on in the market overall. So let's crack on. I'm not going to say very much about econ. We're going to be sharing the presentations afterwards, so feel free to reach out to us afterwards if that's of interest. I want to just basically talk about how renewables enter the electricity market is quite complicated. Most people don't understand it, or they think they understand it, but there's so much complexity in moving things that they get quite confused. So I'm going to just tell you something quite straightforward to bear in mind. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how demand for electricity and the thermal generation costs really are what drives, or how they drive, the penetration of renewables. Now, remember, the example is Spain, but it's actually only because I have the access to the specific numbers, you can actually run the same type of analysis in any other type of European or international market. Okay, some of you have seen me talk around this parabola chart before. To cut a long story short, what we're looking at in the top left is a sort of representative daily profile, where demand rises and drops across a 24-hour window. And we have a certain amount of photovoltaic capacity that comes on, PV1, PV2, PV3. As we add more and more photovoltaic capacity, eventually there'll come a point where there's a tipping point where all of the demand is being met by PV. Now, in this very simple model, I've only got combined cycle power station, gas-fired on one side, and a little bit of PV. And then the question is, do we stop deploying photovoltaic capacity at PV3? And the answer is no, because what really matters is you go to the next point, which is sort of PV4, which is a point in where there's a convergence between what the levelized cost of electricity is from PV and sort of it matches the realized price in the market. Okay, now I've simplified things, right? But what the things to bear in mind, to be very simple, is bear in mind that there will be periods where the price will collapse. Okay, so all the idea that prices will never drop or that cannibalization, I mean, we get to sort of very extreme cases. Either cannibalization will be the end of the solar industry, or nothing's going to happen. And neither of those things is true. There's got to be an equilibrium between the two of them. Okay. Now, with that in mind, what's been going on with electricity demand? Now we're at the middle of November, so we can basically take a very clear view as to how demand has evolved in 2020 relative to 2019. And that's what this chart shows. It's actually weekly data. Right? In the orange line, you've got 2019, and in the blue line, you've got 2020. And in the middle of the year, when the first lockdown occurred, you can see quite a big discrepancy between what demand was in last year compared to this year. Now, don't freak out about these sort of huge negative numbers of minus 25% because it actually has something to do with Easter. Easter last year, Easter this year fell on different periods of time. And so it exacerbated the reduction in demand for one particular week. But in general, if you follow this little yellow line here, right, it's actually the cumulative reduction. Okay, so if you look at the cumulative reduction for 2020 relative to 2019, you know, and you make an assumption of what may happen between now and the end of the year, you're probably going to end up at about somewhere between 5.5% demand drop relative to last year, which, given that the IMF is predicting a GDP reduction of maybe even 13%, it's a very big difference. Okay, now 2021 is expecting, or we're expecting to see a recovery in economic activity, and that should feed through into sort of a recovery in demand. I don't think demand will recover to the same levels it would have otherwise have been, but it'll be much more positive from that perspective. Now, how does demand impact the evolution of pricing, or how much energy, renewable energy, we can absorb into a system? And to cut a long story short, the answer is it doesn't change prices, because what really matters for prices is what's the LCOE for the different technologies. But obviously, if you have a smaller electricity system, you're going to end up with a lot less of an opportunity to deploy additional renewables, right? Whether you have a renewable target or not. Remember, I'm not making the assumption that they are at grid parity and that they make sense at the current set of commodity prices, which is actually true. Okay, so there comes a point where, you know, in a market like the United States of America, you can add a lot more renewables than if you're talking about a small island in the Pacific. Okay, I mean, ultimately, that's what we're saying. But generally speaking, it's the technology cost that drives where it is that prices should go. Now, talking about prices then, what's happened this year? I mean, this year we've seen very significant drops in prices, especially around the lockdown, the first lockdown, the major lockdown, I should say. So if you look at the chart, what I have here is a sort of stacked version of the dispatch, daily dispatch in Spain, up to the beginning of November. We have, and that black line, squiggly line that you see is actually the average daily price. Okay, so there you can see that in the middle of the year, sort of May time, you know, we have some very low average daily prices. By the way, in all this context, it's interesting to know that in Spain, we've never had a zero price. In Germany, in France, we've had very negative prices from time to time. That hasn't happened here. There's a series of reasons for that, in particular, the flexibility of hydro and the way in which the market works, but also because we have a cap and a floor on what prices can be, 180 on one side and 0 on the other. But I mean, we've never actually hit the zero price this year, which is quite an interesting observation in its own right. Now, the thing to notice is, what can I make out, what can I do with all these sort of squiggly lines? And the simple answer is, well, let's break out into three portions. The middle portion here is actually nuclear. So what's interesting about that is the amount of nuclear energy being dispatched on a daily basis does vary with prices. So when prices were dropping quite significantly, we saw the nuclear power plants coming off. And we do see that in places like Germany and France, okay? The other one that's interesting, if you look at the top chart, that's actually the sum of wind, which is shown in green, and solar daily production in this sort of reddish brown, okay? Now, if you do look at what the shape of the black curve looks like to the other one, you'll notice that there is an inverse correlation. So for example, in this particular period where there was a lot of wind generation, you actually see a drop in prices. You can also see it here, here, and here. So there is an inverse relationship. If there is a lot of wind, okay, prices will drop because you're actually getting a lot of additional supply coming onto the market. But the thing is, despite of wherever it is that the wind has been, you know, you're still seeing this black line that doesn't seem to evolve in anything that makes any sense. I mean, there is more wind, there's less wind, there's more sun, there's less sun, but the prices seem to be moving irrespective. Only in the very short term can you see an inverse correlation. So that takes me to the last chart at the bottom. In orange, we have the dispatch from the combined cycle plant, which are the marginal price setters in Spain in general. And then just underneath it in blue, you have the hydro, right? Which includes flexible as well as opposed to not flexible hydro. In Spain, in Iberia in general, there's a lot of big rivers, north, south, east, west. You know, so we have a lot of flexibility, natural flexibility in the system. And what you can see there, there's the high degree of correlation between the dispatch of combined cycle with the hydro, right? Because they tend to peak shape. And in fact, that if you see if you look at what the shape is of the sum of the dispatch of hydro plus CCGT and compare it to the black line, you'll notice that the two things are quite well correlated. And the reason for that is that prices are really being driven by whatever the marginal cost of operating these combined cycle power stations are, right? That's basically what's going on. Now, in certain markets across Europe where we do have a lot of hydro, you will notice something quite similar. But there are other markets in Europe where you will not notice this. As an example, the United Kingdom, because UK has hydro in Scotland and has a little bit of pump storage in Wales. But apart from that, there's very little natural flexibility in the system. Italy has a bit more because a bit more hydro. So you can look at every country and you can basically look at it on this basis. But this is basically following the fundamentals. Nothing has changed here since I did this presentation 12 months ago than what we're saying today. Now, what happens when the cost of generation vary? And to cut a long story short, you do get a change. Because by definition, if it's more competitive to keep using existing thermal plants, it becomes less cost effective to deploy additional renewables. So we have to watch for that. And what I mean by that is that we have to be a little bit conscientious of how do we achieve the renewable energy targets come 2030. Okay. I think that the market will basically give us what we need. Different governments have different views. The Spanish government just come out with a royal decree to basically encourage the deployment of additional renewables using auctions. There are some positive sides to it. In general, I don't know why you would want to do things and throw sand into the works of a market that seems to be operating quite well, despite these things. Anyway, in any case, so where are we with respect to commodity prices? Remember, the link is back to COVID. First thing to notice is Brent prices. I've got Brent prices, natural gas TTF, title transfer facility, which is a Dutch European hub. And then at the bottom, I've got the CO2 price. Okay, and more or less where we're at is focus on the middle one, because gas prices are what really drives the marginal cost of operating combined cycle power stations. I know it's a Dutch measure, but at the end of the day, you can look at border prices for Spain and TTF, and you'll be able to see some correlation between the two of them. And then there's the CO2 price. Yes, the CO2 price did take a tumble at the first lockdown. There's some sort of what I would describe as panic selling here. So the price jumped to about 15 euro per ton. But then it's actually recovered quite nicely, and we're back down to the high 20s. Brent's at 45. Who knows where that will go? But at the end of the day, and you'll notice there's a relationship between that and gas prices. Gas prices around 14, 15 euro per megawatt hour, which if you think about in the doldrums, these are contracts for this next month, right? By the way. But I mean, the spot price for gas in the middle of this year was like a 5 euro per megawatt hour equivalent, fuel equivalent, which is extremely low. I mean, it's about as low as what it was in the United States. Thinking about Henry Hub and stuff like that. That was never going to be sustainable. Anyway, so the markets are there. Please pay attention to them. Top left chart here, we've got the contract for 2021 base load. And what you'll see is that since January, it's sort of varied somewhere between, I don't know, 40 and 50 euro per megawatt hour, more or less. Yes, you can see the impact of COVID having come in, where expectation is that prices are going to be dropping, but it hasn't actually fallen off the cliff in the same way as, say, the daily price had done. Okay, so there is quite a lot of visibility with respect to what your future prices may look like, and if you're looking to hedge, or at least looking to try and identify how you can sell electricity into the future, whether by PPA or otherwise, there's a number of instruments that you can use for that. So just to fall back on this whole thing, is like, look, what are the important things to bear in mind? The simple answer is, don't pay too much attention to demand per se, right? COVID has an impact on commodity prices, which is having an indirect impact on electricity prices. But demand in general is not such a big driver of what's going on in electricity prices per se, especially across Europe, because a lot of these markets are oversupplied. By which I mean, if you take the sum of all the capacity and adjust for firmness, you'll see that you have a lot more capacity and the lights will never go out, which, in case anybody's noticed, at least my lights haven't gone out for several years. So I used to live in Venezuela as a kid, so I know what it's like to have candles, but I don't even know where I have any candles in this house anymore. So it's one of those measures of how well we're living. Now, I want to leave things there. Just a couple of things. Remember, COVID's direct impact on the electricity market is through the impact on demand, in the sense that we have a smaller target amount of energy that we must meet to make sure the lights don't go out, which has a secondary impact that if we don't think we're going to be recovering that demand between now and 2030, it reduces the requirement on adding or having to add additional renewables to meet our targets for 2030. And I think that's a generic statement that can be made across all European countries, Spain included. And the second one is watch commodity prices, because short term, short, medium term, those are the ones that are going to still be driving prices up or down, right? Unfortunately, whether you like it or not, if you're involved in renewables and you're taking some form of pricing risk, you're basically hoping, you know, that somebody else is going to be setting the price, which naturally explains why it is people are interested in, you know, in having PPAs and things like that. But I'm going to leave it at that and let the discussion carry on and leave a little bit of time for Q&A. Thanks very much, Jessica.